held electronically pursuant to and in the compliance of the continuity of government ordinance or an ordinance to effectuate change in certain deadlines to modify public meeting and public hearing practices and procedures to address continuity of operations associated with COVID-19 pandemic, adopted April 28th, 2020 by the Orange County Board of Supervisors in accordance with Virginia Code 15.2-1413. This meeting is accessible by www.youtube.com/channel/UNCL-EM-LGRXYD FKCPI8-6OQ. You can find that on the county's website. If I read it too fast for you, for those who are trying to jump in there, it is located there. We're going to call the meeting to order, and we need to make another note that this meeting is conducted remotely and there will be no physical public access during the meeting, and there will be no opportunity for the public comment. It appears we have a quorum. If we could do our normal, just go through, starting at District 5 tonight. State your name and your location, and we'll develop our quorum that way.
Jim Hutchison, District 5 Commissioner, 525 Harrison Circle, Locust Grove, Virginia.
Julie Zellmaker, District 4. I'm at 34104 Indiantown Road in Locust Grove, Virginia.
Donald Brooks, District 3, 9258 Everona Road, Unionville, Virginia.
George D. Yancey, District 2, 16170 Cox Mill Road, Gordonsville, Virginia.
Jason Capel, 6315 Spotswood Trail, Gordonsville, Virginia, greatest town in America.
All right, it appears that we have a full quorum of commissioners tonight, so we'll move to the approval of the agenda.
I'll make a motion, we approve the agenda as presented.
Second.
It's been moved and second, we approve the agenda. Moved by District 5, moved by District 2, approved by District 5. All in favor, say aye.
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 All opposed? Appears goes through unanimously. The approval of minutes, March 4, 2021. You should have a copy of them in your packet or be exposed to them. We solicit a motion on that also.
Move to approve the minutes of 4 March as written.
Second. I'm sorry, Jason, you go ahead.
Either one of us. I'll second it, Chairman Brooks.
Thank you. District 5 moved, District 1 seconds. All in favor, say aye.
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 Aye. Aye.
All opposed? Appears we have a full approval with that also. All right, it looks like we have no new business, but we do have a continuation of SUP 20-04. This is just to discuss the potential conditions. This is just to discuss those, and it is so that we can make sure that if we want to put conditions on this SUP, that we have them legally and written out for every commissioner. I will say this before we go too far. Eric, do you want to do this, or do you want Sandra to do this, or how do you want me to do this? I'm a little bit confused on what these conditions. What do you want me to do?
Well, that's totally in the call of the chair how to proceed. I'm happy with Sandra reviewing the conditions, and if any of my advice needs to be offered on the terms of any conditions either that are or are not included in there, I'm happy to respond to any specific questions.
Okay. Okay, so Ms. Thornton, we ask you to go forward, talk about the conditions, make sure we know where we're at on the conditions. We'll go from there.
Okay. Well, Mr. Chairman, as all of you, I'm sure remember, at your last meeting, the conclusion was to have commissioners who were interested in advancing conditions in addition to what had already been presented in the staff report were invited to submit their proposed conditions to the office by the following Monday with review and then comments back to you by the end of the week last week. So we did receive comments which were reviewed by our legal counsel. And what I had presented in the memo dated March 11 does not include those proposed conditions that we received that Mr. Lansing deemed to be not connected to the land use considerations for the application. This memo also does not duplicate the conditions that had been proposed in the staff report dated February 3rd. So what is set forth in the memo includes revisions to the commissioner recommendations based on Mr. Lansing's counsel. So the following items were are offered for your consideration for potential conditions. Applicant agrees to comply with all applicable current and future federal, state, and local laws and regulations. Note, non-compliance would be a violation of the conditions of zoning approval. No student shall be a convicted sex offender. For the purposes of this special use permit, convicted sex offender means a person convicted of any of the crimes listed in section 9.1-902 of the Code of Virginia or its successor statute. No student shall be a person convicted of a violent felony as that term is defined in section 17.1-805C of the Code of Virginia or its successor statute. The applicant will have policies and procedures in place to provide neighbors with the responsible staff person's contact information upon request, and also that require the responsible staff person to respond to neighbors' concerns. And I just added a note, there had been some discussion about the NARR, VARR standards. This is drawn from those standards, as is the last one. The applicant will implement policies to ensure that the property is well maintained. There had been discussion, as considerable discussion at the meeting, and there was a condition advanced regarding a gender-based condition. Mr. Lansing indicated that based on his research, the facility operator may discriminate upon the basis of sex in compliance with Fair Housing Act provisions and exemptions as defined therein, but the local government may not use its zoning powers to impose such discrimination. Josh Gillespie, Director of Planning and Development Services, was looking into the possibility of a time-limited condition. County legal staff has determined that it is not appropriate to restrict approval of the SUP only to this applicant. There had been a recommendation that the SUP not run with the land, but actually be limited to this particular applicant. And our legal counsel has indicated that we can't do that. So that concludes the
I'm sorry.
memo. I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman. That's basically the memo, reporting on what we had received from commissioners and what council's review indicated, and our comments back as well.
Okay, commissioners, this is how I intend to handle this. If this is okay, we'll do our normal go down, starting from District 1 this time, go down and talk about these conditions, add some, if any, But just before I do that, if somebody's got a blazing question that's on their mind or concern for either the attorney or any of the accounting staff, you can do that. But I prefer, unless it's blazing and you don't want to lose it, let's wait till we call your district.
Chairman Brooks,
Yes.
I would highly recommend to the commission that the word student be eliminated on these provisions and substituted with individual.
Okay.
Student
Well,
refers.
George, thinking along my line, because I was going to say no attendee, because I didn't think it was a school, so I thought student was representative of a school more so than it was attendee or individual. So before we go any further, Mr. Lansing or Mr. Gillespie or Ms. Thornton, y'all have any idea or relating to that, disagree with that, or?
I would just pose the question, if we replace student with individual, whether we're prepared for the potential ambiguity, because I think there's supposed to be a supervisor of some sort involved in living in this arrangement. So would we want the supervisor to be subject to those same conditions as well? I can't think of a problem with that. I'm just posing the question. Well,
can we just then say no individual, attendee, student, and or staff member? I mean, just make it more than just make it encumbered to try to be inclusive of all those things.
Sure. I'll defer to planning staff on that question.
Well, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Capel and I had a slight discussion on this too, and the word resident came up versus student or individual.
Well, I'll tell you why I don't like the word resident, because it makes it permanent. In law, and I'm not trying to teach law, Eric's here for that, but if you were serving a summons on something and you were a resident, you can accept that legal document. If you are a sojourner or a visitor or just an attendee, you cannot accept any legal document for that place. Am I not right, Eric?
Yeah, you're right. Residency is defined at law to include two components. One is the place where you are habitating at that moment. And then two is your permanent intention to reside there. So there's an element of permanence in the definition of resident.
But don't we declare that it would be a permanence when we're talking about at least a 12-month program? You talking 12 months somewhere, 90 days, you're supposed to change your driver's license if you come from out of state. I'm just trying to, you know what I'm saying? I'm just trying to get away from, you tell me, I won't tell you, I'll just tell you my thought process.
Yeah, even the courts have tossed that football around a lot without any clear lines being resolved for how long it needs to change. I'll tell you, I'm living in an apartment right now that I plan on moving back to my house after the lease expires. And it's a 13-month lease, but I don't consider myself a resident in this apartment. And I did a lot of legal research to determine whether I should change residency, but yeah.
I'm very sorry that you don't feel like you reside there. I can tell you, if I showed up 25 years ago and you gave me that statement, I would call you a trespasser. But I get your point. Josh, what do you think here? Weigh in on this a little bit here.
I will defer to the legal definition of the term that we're going to use, but as it relates to visitors, staff, and occupants, I think those are certainly terms we could use. I think individuals is certainly commonly understood. And again, I would defer to the legal interpretation of the most appropriate terms, but I think all those terms have meaning.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
So this SUP pertains to the whole property, right? Or maybe legal. I mean, this isn't just this building, this is the lot, right? So there's a church on this lot. And it seems to me that we would have just precluded any convicted sex offender from attending church. I don't think that's really the intent. And I don't think also, in my opinion, and this is obviously open for discussion, I don't think the intent would be to keep someone who was a convicted sex offender from visiting a person there. So, I mean, I think, in my opinion, what we're trying to keep from happening is having a convicted sex offender in the program, you know, whether it be a student or an employee of the program. So I don't disagree with Mr. Yancey's comment, but I feel like we need to scope the words a little bit, and maybe rather than focus on the words, you know, let's talk first about what we're trying to accomplish. So if I may, are we just trying to accomplish keeping convicted sex offenders and convicted violent offenders from being residents in the home, or employees, staff that are there on site, or are we just trying to keep them off the property or even out of the church?
Mr. Chairman, if I might, and Eric may correct me, but I believe the special use permit and the conditions that might be attached to it would apply only to the use that is the subject of the special use permit. Is that not correct, Eric?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, so
we wouldn't be
wouldn't have to
affecting
worry
any
about
other
the church.
property there.
Yeah, these wouldn't apply to the church. Listening to the conversation, I'm wondering, because, I mean, to me, individual sounds maybe a little broad and vague. I mean, if we said individuals enrolled in the treatment program, and then if you wanted to expand that to include staff and counselors or whatever, but if we qualified individuals to some extent, that might achieve at least part of your intent.
Well, maybe I might be out on this island by myself, but I want to control sex offenders visiting also. I think we have a vulnerable population, and I think you can preclude them from a lot of places. I mean, it is well known that they're not allowed on school property at all. That's a big public entity of students, if you will, and sex offenders are not allowed there. They know that, and some of them are actually parents, and so provisions have to be made. So we don't go down this rabbit hole and chase this for the next 20 minutes. I think we can get there and say, okay, no individual student and or staff member and or visitee or attendee, and just keep calm until we get to just about everybody and say, as it relates to this SUP, because that's where it is, and then leave the church and the other thought out.
And, Chairman Brooks, do you and the rest of the commission, do you feel the same way about the violent offenders as well? Or is it just the sex? Do we need to?
I do.
Okay. I mean, I'm fine with that. So, but I think that's a good
because we're looking
point,
for security here. We're looking for safety, and when we're looking for security and safety, you need to put it in writing so that it's not ambiguous, but everybody understands it.
Well, let me ask a question. Do you define domestic abuse as a violent offender?
Yes.
Because I would assume that many of these potential attendees would be part of a domestic dispute problem as well.
Mr. Chairman.
Well, they would have to do their.
Hold on.
They would have to do their own.
Chairman Brooks, I'm not an attorney, and Eric can maybe chime on this, but it requires more than one incident of domestic abuse, at least from what I read, to be considered a felony.
Yeah, it requires a third conviction.
Right. So
and even then, lots of people with third convictions aren't necessarily convicted of the felony count.
Yeah, so we've limited to convicted felons, Mr. Hutchinson, and that requires sort of a record of domestic abuse, not just once. And so that's, so I don't know how you feel about that. I mean, it's not just a single instance of domestic abuse. It's a series of them, more than one.
Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry I brought up my concern with student, and my reason for bringing that up is basically student is a noun, and Dr. Google says that it is a definition, says who is a person who is studying at a school or college, or denotes someone who is studying in order to enter a particular profession, or a person who takes an interest in a particular subject. And I'm not sure any of our potential attendees at the addiction center fit that criteria.
I think you're right, Mr. And listen, there's no need to apologize. That's a good grab. That's why we had this meeting. You're exactly right. If Dr. Google says that, then that's the authority for 85% of Americans these days. So if Dr. Google, but that is correct. It is a noun, and that's just grammar, and that's why you had so much conversation about it. So let's try this. No attendee, individual, and/or worker, etc., shall be. How about convicted of a sex offender as whatever? That just says, okay, we're trying to collect everything here. It goes back to what Mr. Gillespie said. It's common information that what we're trying to get rid of. Okay, will that work, Mr. Lansing?
Yeah, and just to be on the double safe side, I don't think it would hurt to throw in language that just makes it clear that we're talking about the recovery home and not the church, since it is on the same lot.
Okay.
I think
Okay.
Sandra's point is right.
Okay.
I think it would implicitly refer to the use and not the lot, but let's just make that extra clear so it doesn't come up.
Well, we can go at the top of these conditions and say, these conditions apply to this SUP as relates to the applicant's recovery home. Boom. And that certainly then sets them down and then sets them out. Correct?
Yes, sir.
All right.
So
If anybody else doesn't have any blazing ideas, I sense the blaziness then. I don't sense any blazingness now. So we'll start with District 1. Mr. Capel, walk through any concerns you may have or additions you may have.
Mr. Chairman, could I ask Eric to clarify a point? As Sandra was reading the conditions earlier, she kept referring to the fact that the legal department said the commission could not require a particular condition. And I just want to make sure, Eric, is that correct? Or would it more correctly be that the commission's legal advisor would advise them not to do that? But
that's correct.
You can't actually prevent the planning commission from adopting a particular.
Of course.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. And a good catch there. We appreciate that. And that's good information for the commission also. No disparity against our legal department, but it's just that we can, and if somebody abrupts, then they have to go to work to defend what we've done.
Mr. Chairman, what is the final written condition that we're now putting forth?
Well, in that particular one, it's going to say, and I'm going to defer back to Sandra, but it's going to say no individual, no attendee, and no employee, etc., shall be a convicted sex offender.
At the rehab home.
Right. All of this is just for the rehab home. It goes back to what we said we'd put up top, a notice that this only applies to the SUP.
Mr. Chairman, to muddy the waters a little bit further on item number 4 and number 5, who's going to be the watchdog for those 2 items?
The watchdog is going to be the
Or is this
the applicant. If
self-policing?
they're successful, yeah, it's going to have to be self-policing. Otherwise, you would have to have somebody there 24/7 checking names and a data bank and so on. It's going to have to be self-policing for them. But trust me, typically when those things are averted, if they are successful in this application, it's well noted and somebody's going to complain. They're well complaint driven. Trust my experience in that, more so than you would ever know. Even folks that they assume was convicted of something that was not. All right, Mr. Capel, you go ahead with any concerns you have, then we'll walk down the districts.
On the Narvar permit, Eric, is it correct? So we can't require that because that's a private entity. Is that true? But if it were a government license, we could require a state government license if there were one available.
Yeah, if there were a state government license, we could certainly do that.
Okay. That to Mark Johnson's.
Hold up, Mr. Capel, before you go beyond that point.
Yes, sir.
But I want that one in there. So that's one of my pet peeves, that they shall be. There's got to be something here that makes, if we're going to approve this, there's got to be something in there that makes them toe the line to something and not just have a big house there. So I think they got to have something. There's no state guidance. There's no federal guidance. This is outside, I would say, non-biased entity that they brought up that they want to follow. So let's make them follow. That's just my opinion, Mr. Capel, on that line.
Chairman Brooks, I completely agree with you. And I have some additional questions for Eric and some additional thoughts. Let me start with one additional thought, and that is that I would like for us to agree that if new information arrives between now and the next meeting, that we might be okay considering additional conditions. That would be the first thing. I don't personally want these to be considered final tonight because I just think there's more information that may be coming through research and other means. But to Mr. Brooks' point, I was curious, this legal opinion that we can't require that particular condition because it's a private entity. Is that based on something that's been tested, or is that based on an opinion that you have based on research? Is there an actual precedent that supports that, or are you interpreting some precedents?
No, no, there is. I think I've gone into detail in some of the emails that I've sent out on that opinion. But the authority to impose the conditions is considered legislative. And the legislative authority that is being exercised by ultimately the Board of Supervisors is non-delegable. So even if the Board of Supervisors were to designate, say, the zoning administrator or some governmental authority with the power to certify or to license a applicant, even that would be outside of the scope, because the actual conditions have to be imposed and crafted by the legislative authority. So if you're giving some entity the authority to revoke or effectively revoke the conditional use permit, then that's an inherently legislative power. And the courts have determined that's not delegable. So as long as it's relating to crafting the conditions themselves, they have to be approved by a legislative authority. If, on the other hand, the Planning Commission were to adopt specific criteria and incorporate criteria, paragraph for paragraph, for example, that NARS or VARS had put out, that would be something that is within the legislative scope of the Board of Supervisors.
Oh, okay. Thanks for that, Eric.
Yeah, I can pull up
so-
the cases I'm citing if you would like.
Yeah. I know that there's things that have been tested in court and other things that are interpretive, and opinions are great, but you never know in the court how it's all going to play out. But let me ask you this: what is the risk of? So you make a recommendation. So we still, to Mark Johnson's point,
Right.
in spite of your advice, we could say, no, Eric, sorry, we want this condition in there. What is the risk in terms of the permit? So let's say it were challenged somehow. Would the entire permit be at risk, or would just that single condition be at risk?
Yeah, that's a great question.
Thank you.
So
Thank you.
yeah. So that will depend on something called a severability clause, which I don't think we have right now in the conditions. Severability is the question of whether a particular problematic provision can be severed by the court from the legislation as a whole. And usually the approach of a court is that if they find one of the provisions problematic, then they're going to just nix the entire legislation. But you can fix that by putting something called a severability clause in there that says if any of these conditions are considered to be illegal or void, then all the remaining conditions will still remain in place. So it will depend on whether you want a severability clause in there. Would you want the authorization to still be in place if one of those conditions were to be stricken out?
Right. Okay. So it's a little bit of a double-edged sword, is what you're saying.
Yeah, it could be. And
Right.
then again, if there are some provisions that you think should be severable and some conditions that you don't think should be severable, you can do that too.
Okay. So the final, so I guess commissioners will need to discuss that severability clause thing. But the final, here's my final question. So the applicant can't, well, actually twofold. Can the applicant volunteer conditions? So could the applicant volunteer to adhere to the NAR-VAR license and make his own application contingent upon maintaining that license? His or her. There.
And then they can't challenge it on that basis because they were the ones who offered it?
Well, here's where I'm going with this. What
Yeah.
the heck's the point of having an application? So
Right.
they show up and they say, hey, we're going to do X, Y, Z, and everything's all happy and we're all gumdrops and bubble gum. And
Yeah.
guess what? They don't have to do anything that they put in their
Right.
application because, you didn't have a condition. And hey, we now have an all-male facility with no restrictions, no regulation whatsoever. So I'm wondering why, if we can't consider these things, why in the world do we allow them to present them to us and put them in writing in their application? Why don't we strike everything that isn't pertinent? Because it seems kind of like a scam. It seems like, hey, here's all this happy, feel-good stuff that we never have to do.
Yeah, it's hard for me to know what the applicant would do if they disagreed with one of those conditions after getting their application approved. But I do know that there have been some situations where applicants will challenge a conditional use permit or a special use permit or a rezoning after proffering their own conditions and then arguing in court that the very conditions that they proffered were illegal. To try to get those things severed out. So for example, I've heard a situation where a cash proffer was illegally accepted, even though the applicant proffered the cash proffer. They then got their permit accepted. And then they challenged the very cash proffer that they themselves had proposed in court. So it, it's kind of underhanded of that particular applicant to do that.
Well, in some ways, we're dealing with that now with the application where they want to alter the SUP because the build out or the sellout didn't happen as they thought it would happen. So in some ways, we're getting that. We've got that in an application right now. If the commission can just digress to think a little bit, so that's not unusual even to hear. But go ahead, Mr. Capel.
Well, I'm just asking a question. Why does the county allow things that we're not allowed to consider to come through as part of the application process? That's what I'm asking. Like, I don't understand. Like, give me your application and they put it in writing and then we see it and then we're told that we're not allowed to, we're not allowed to say that what they put in writing is what they have to do. So why do we waste everyone's time with that? I'm just asking a question. I mean, it's like, it just seems silly. Like you're going to tell me a bunch of stuff that is of no material value whatsoever. And I can't consider it. So why do we even let them have it in the application?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think this really just goes back to what Mark Johnson pointed out a moment ago. I mean, this comes down ultimately to the risk tolerance of the commission and the board. And this commission and the board can ultimately impose whatever conditions they want. Whether those conditions are going to be, whether they would fly later is another question for down the road.
Okay, well, it was a little bit of a rhetorical question, but
yeah,
what I heard was too bad.
I'm sorry if I missed it.
That's okay. Well, the question is, why do we allow people to put in writing through our process things that we're not allowed to consider? Mm-hmm. That was my question. So like, why do we have a bunch of happy, glad stuff that we're not even allowed to act on? So, and it's a little bit rhetorical, but it just seems silly that an applicant comes forward and says, I'll do X, Y, Z, and it means nothing. Like it has no bearing. It's unenforceable through the permit process. That doesn't make sense to me at all. What's the point of the application?
Understood.
I think one of the corrective measures may be we may need to put in writing in a little more detail in specific areas in our text amendments what we really want and what we don't really want, and what's the outline of what they really have to put on the application. Mr. Gillespie and myself spoke about that a little bit this morning, and I don't want to go into it in this meeting, but I think some corrective actions he's got in the back of his head will correct those things in time to come, because he was so aptly to show me a couple things that would work even in this situation had we had it in place. And I'll just leave it at that. So he's on top of it. He sees the issues, and I think that we're going to get through it, but we have to huddle through what we have now. And I don't think you can get answers to that tonight, Jason. I don't think anybody can commit one way or the other why we do that. But your point is certainly well taken. I was taken back when we started working on these conditions and we got to where we are. But you're not going to get answers to that question, so go to the next one.
Yeah, I'm done. I just the last thing I want to say is, so we can impose any condition that we desire, regardless of your legal advice, and it would get sorted out later. And the applicant can also offer conditions, but that doesn't really provide any relief, right? I mean, it's like,
not necessarily.
Okay,
Yeah.
Got it. That's all I have. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr.
All
Chairman.
right, thank you. Mr. Yancey?
I defer to District
3.
4.
All right, well, I'm gonna jump in front of Julian, go ahead and do mine. In our zoning ordinance, or in our zoning it at 70-141, it talks about a substantial change. And in the guidelight there of what's there. And I think when we look at Ag 1, there is a substantial change to put a house there, a home there, a residential living there in that community to do what they have proposed. I'm looking more for it's more of a comment than it is a condition. I don't see how we can get over that hurdle or that burden of this not being a substantial change. I just don't. But the second thing that I have, I think we need to put a severability clause in here, whether it works or not. It just, and I want to see that, and this is not saying I'm for or against, but if I had to put a condition on there, I would put that there must be a NARVAR standard approval or stamp of approval prior to this being in complete activation. There must be. I don't know how we can take an agricultural zoning, put this type of thing on it, and have no state, federal, or any entity that watchdogs it. I don't know how you do that. Even in churches now, and I've done some recent work on this, the accountability of the funds and what you do with it and how you pay the staff has come under scrutiny with the IRS. It is not as blanket as it used to be. And this is skating really under it. And while it's on a church property and it's connected to the church in its inception, it still should have some type of things as if this church was running a daycare center. If this place was running a daycare center, somebody would have some authority over it. We're just going to open this and nobody has authority. So I'm saying we must put in there, they must comply with those standards, each and every one of them. Something has got to hold them so that we just don't say, here, there you go.
Hey, Chairman Brooks.
Yeah.
So I agree with you on that. But the thing with the severability clause is if we let's say they went to court and challenged that, the permit would stay in place without that condition. Whereas if there was no severability clause, I'm not sure what would happen. Does that mean all the conditions would go, or just the SUP would go?
Well, maybe I misunderstood.
Maybe we have Eric again.
Yeah, maybe I misunderstood Mr. Lansing's guidance. I thought he said if we put a severability clause in there, then they would lose the SUP.
No,
Or
that's the way it is without that's the way it is without a severability clause, or at least that's sort of the assumption. And if you want all of the whole SUP to hang on the conditions you impose, I would recommend the opposite. I would recommend a non-severability clause.
Okay. Well, then I misunderstood what you said. I only grabbed that because you said it, so I misunderstood it. What I really want, though, I do want them to be, if again, that's not for or against, if it's going to be an entity, then I want it to be governed by something that can govern this to make sure it is operating, because we say the county can't do it. They don't have the staff. Eric has said that legislatively, we can't attach this and that to it. I'm just hustling on through the comments. Well, then what makes this place a good place? Forget who's putting it there. Forget that it's a church. Forget that it's anything. What makes it a good place for a group of people to stay? Nothing other than the people that's running it. I would encourage you to look at some of your FBI files and things like that on different entities that set up in different areas. And then, oh, well, we got a problem. Not suggesting that's that, but we have no guidance, none. What I'm understanding, and I'll ask again, Eric, who would supervise this from any entity at all if it came in existence? If we don't have that in there, NARS bars in there, NARS or bars, I'm sorry.
Yeah, just a quick note, Mr. Chairman, we may be delving deep enough into legal advice that the chair might want to consider going to closed session.
Okay. Okay. All right. Well, let's do this.
But
let's go into closed session. Can you read the motion?
Sure, I
Eric?
can.
And beg your pardon?
Yeah, I can create one. I think we'd need some IT help.
Yeah.
In making sure that we actually are genuinely in closed session.
Cole, can you help us here a little bit? Okay, so now if we talk only we can hear.
Don't we have to go into closed session
No.
publicly?
So you have to, you'd have to basically call each person individually to go into a closed session. I can't do it. So like from the Zoom here, I can't just mute you guys or mute what the stream hears and you guys be able to talk freely. You kind of get what I'm saying?
Tell me what we have to do because we have to go into it.
So you guys would have to call each person individually. So for instance, you could set up a second Zoom meeting. You guys would leave this one and join that one where I wouldn't be in there. I would keep this one open. And then you guys would then just rejoin and just let me know that you guys are all good. And then I would show you guys back on screen and you guys would be all good to talk.
Mr. Chairman?
Let's do this. Hold on a second, Mr. Yancey. Can we just continue this whole thing to another meeting? And then that will be executive session before we start? Can we do that, Eric?
I think we can resolve this right now, publicly. If you allow me to do a couple things.
Okay, how can we resolve it publicly?
Okay, if you all refer to the comp plan that was drafted in 2013, revised in 2018, on page 27, it refers to future land use policy destinations. Under Ag A1, the wording says, land in this category generally includes historic sites, sensitive conservation areas, forest, open space, and areas of prime land. At the bottom of that, it says, in the future, land in the A1 area should remain substantially unchanged from its current pattern of uses. As a general rule, development in the A1 areas will be discouraged as significant changes could alter the prevailing characteristics and therefore would be incompatible with the county's vision and stated principle in this plan.
Okay, point well taken, but we still need to either continue this, whatever, because we announced that we were only going to discuss conditions. And I think what you're going toward is a vote, and we didn't say that the vote would happen.
But my point being is, we can put all the conditions in the world. If you do not concur with the comp plan, then why have a comp plan?
That is not a disagreement on my part, but what is a disagreement on my part is the order of business. I hear what you're saying. So what you're saying is, in essence, let's have a vote and potentially what you're saying, it'll get voted down because we'll be outside the comp plan. That's not what we said. So then I need a motion from you, if you're going to do it, is to continue this until April 1, or continue it like it's stated to April 1, and then we'll vote then. And you're saying just stop the conditions. I'm saying that then we have not done this part of the meeting, and I don't think that's advisable. We need to go through these motions. I wanted to more or less have the continuation until 4-1, but the first part of 4-1 will be executive session. We'll come in to go in executive session, and that's it. And that way we don't have to do all this calling back tonight and trying to connect and reconnect. Again, I have take my hat off to Mr. Lester, because he cautioned me that this would be executive session time.
Mr. Chairman, why don't we just have the highly talented and amazing Cole Shiflett send us, a Zoom link, and he'll mute this thing, and let's just get on the Zoom link and have our executive session. I mean, it just take a few minutes just to switch over to the other.
Okay, Cole, can you do that? Cole, can you do that?
Cole's not here. I'm actually the one hosting. My name's Walker. I'm actually new. I'm the
What's
new
your
IT.
name? What's
Walker.
your name? Walker. Okay, you got to tell us who you are, because we don't know. All right,
Yeah,
Walker,
you're all
do
good.
that?
But yeah, absolutely can. Just give me a few minutes.
Yeah, how about the amazing and talented Walker send us
Walker.
a Zoom link?
Our email came from Cole, Walker, so you got to tell him stop doing your emails.
You're all good. Yeah, I'll get work on that right now. Give me a few minutes, and I'll send it to you guys,
All right,
and
so
then you guys would then just
I'll
join.
take a motion to go into recess for 10 minutes.
So moved.
Mr. Chairman, we'll need to adopt the closed session resolution as well.
But I got to do that in public, so I got to come back and do it, or do it now.
We should do that. We should adopt the closed session resolution now. And then we can go into recess for closed session once we're ready.
Okay, so I'll solicit that motion to go into closed session for actions as it pertains to legal matters coming before the commission.
All right, I'll read the resolution now then. Whereas the Planning Commission of Orange County desires to discuss in closed meeting the following matters: consultation with legal counsel employed or retained by the public body regarding specific legal matters, regarding the adoption of this SUP requiring the provision of legal advice by such counsel. And whereas pursuant to section 223711A8 of the Code of Virginia, such discussions may occur in closed session. Now therefore be it resolved by the Planning Commission of Orange County that it does hereby authorize discussion of the aforesaid matters in closed session. I'll need that as a motion.
So moved then for.
Yeah, second.
District 5 so moved, second by District 1 Capel. All in favor say aye.
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 All opposed, motion carries. We'll be in recess for at least 10 minutes, and then Mr. Walker, you can get us the information we need.
Hey, Walker Merriman, you copy?
Walker,
He's off mute. He's on mute.